self-expression.
Freedom of expression.
Yes.
What to do with freedom of expression?
Yes.
Yes. No, that's dumb. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Ageless Art Podcast. I'm David Getson. Here with me is Xene Abraham. Hello.
Hello, David.
So, today, the topic that you had in mind to discuss is...
Freedom of expression.
Exactly.
So this was another moment. I think it might have even been the same day that I called on the way home. Perhaps I called on the way to work, and then I called on the way home.
I think that's right.
And I was thinking about how I enjoy people who have crazy wardrobes and wear colorful, outrageous clothing.
Yes, and the question is why? Why is that so amazing?
I like it because these people are expressing themselves, and they challenge the people around them to accept a new normal of what expectations in society are. And I really like this idea. I love the idea of people who are totally addicted to 80s vintage clothing. Some of it is just quite hideous.
Yes, it's not my cup of tea.
But you know
but if it's someone's native expression of how they feel, then you can
when I see someone wearing all of it together, it's amazing, and it makes me feel happy and a little bit giddy on the inside. And it's the same with anybody who's put a little effort into their clothing or just trying to express yourself. Because honestly, we've got a lot of people just wearing their sweatpants and their sweatshirts around or they even go in their pajamas. There's not a lot of self-expression there.
And the genuine enjoyment of it is contagious, really.
Absolutely. And I think that we need more of it in our society, not less. And I think that for one thing, it makes people feel that they can be themselves around you. When you dress a little bit odd or a little bit unusual, people come up to you a little bit easier. They have less expectation about what you might say and really just kind of want to be curious about what it is you're all about. So I think we should all push ourselves just a little bit outside our comfort zones. And if you're into the crazy eye makeup and you want to look like Cleopatra, I'm all about it. I want to see you. Stop in.
Great. Yes, that would be interesting. And I think that it's a little bit like having a dog next to you. It's something that people feel comfortable talking about.
Yeah, a conversation starter.
Yes.
Yes, and embrace it and feel good about it. And if your parents hate it, it's okay.
That's an old tradition. Here, David Getson historical tangent. Oh no, everyone's switching off the podcast. No, but I have another podcast about history if you want more of it. No, the thing about upsetting your parents, not only was that what Socrates got upset about, what they got upset about at Socrates for corrupting the youth, but people have forgotten over time. This is something that Dan Carlin mentioned in one of his great episodes about Rome, is that historians who grow up in a time where there is not a kind of generation gap tend to be blind to other times in history when that happened. And we have the kind of dubious honor of living in the interesting times that we do to realize that the late Republic of Rome, when Caesar was a teenager and in his 20s, that not many people know this. When he was a young man like that, he was kind of like a weird beatnik. He actually had a goatee. Caesar had a goatee. He was already going a little bit bald, and he wore fringe on his toga.
Cool.
And the older generation hated it, but this was part of being a young, cool person who would, read Greek poetry.
Rule all the world someday.
That's right, and that's what they talked about. So it's...
what it does though, when you're a little outrageous, your mother is sitting around having tea or runs into you outside, or, if you're living near your older friends or your next door neighbor, but they learn to know you as a person. So when you come up and you're dressed a little outrageously and they're with their friends or something, They defend you. They defend you. Well, but she's a nice person, or he's a nice person, or they are a nice person. So by being a little bit more outrageous, we pave a wider road for those who are already outrageous, and we bring craziness into acceptance faster. This is what I'm after.
Yes, right. It creates a space. That's right. Black and white together let all the infinite combinations of gray be where they are. So we have to thank the extremes for playing nice, and that creates this space. And I think that's really, we were talking earlier, that there's one of the ways I think it's going to be maybe 50 years before we have before we have a good idea of where culture has been shifting with all the online stuff and all the social media. But I think something that I'm noticing is that this space of self-expression, even though it's one of those great paradoxes of the internet, just like how as soon as there was room for infinite length of articles, because you didn't have to print anything, as soon as that happens, what happens? Do people look at most of the time Twitter, short text?
Yes.
Another one of those paradoxes is that just at the time where you can do any weird thing online, and especially if you do it anonymously, maybe that's the key, anonymous, is that things that you do in person and online, and the stuff you do in person might be photographed. I can't imagine what it would be like to be a teenager today and to get embarrassed by something, not only and have everyone see it. That would have been horrible for me. It would have been horrible for anybody. Anyways, but then to have it be remembered forever, and Facebook reminds you of it 10 years later. And so people, that creates a chilling effect, as they say in the press, on people's social interactions. And so the bold action of going out there and saying, yeah, this is my weird thing and I'm fine with it. Oh, guess what? People are liking it. I think that's ultra important in this new context.
I agree. Stand out from the crowd. In the 80s, as an example, we all looked alike. You can see any of the 80s remake movies, or even the older ones from the 80s, and you can see that we were all wearing peach, and these crazy pants, and we all looked alike. And I love in society now that we don't really have a standard. I don't believe there's always going to be those who are more conservative and those who are more liberal in their dressing. But I think you can get away with a lot. You can mix all kinds of things up. You can go totally vintage in 60s wear. And I did for New Year's Eve and looked fabulous in it. So I think that anything goes. And I'd just like to encourage people with a little modesty, because we also, in our effort to be outrageous, we don't want to be offensive. So, it might be an idea to cover some of our body parts.
Sure.
All of the world covers some of their body parts, except in Africa. Then it's really hot there. But in this temperature especially, we should cover some of our body parts. How you do that should be an expression and make you feel good. And you shouldn't go around thinking that you don't look good. Just feel good about what you're wearing.
Well, and I think that's one of the great things about this shift. You put your finger on something really interesting, that we've gone from, this is part of what a guy I'm a big fan of, Alvin Toffler, wrote about in a book called The Third Wave, that he called the phenomenon of demassification. He had the mass media. And this was before the internet. This is when he was writing this when it was still almost the ARPANET. It wasn't the internet we know today. It was with the internet, but it was pre-World Wide Web. I think this was in the late 80s that he and Heidi Toffler were writing this. And he talked about the very important phenomenon of demassification, that you'll go from 3 networks all over the place into breaking up into a lot of stuff. Not too many people were anticipating that. He wrote about it eloquently. Part of the consequences of that is there is no longer a dominant ruling style. There are these, some people call it siloing. And some people worry about that, and rightly so, that you shouldn't get stuck in a silo. You should communicate with people who think differently than you, if for nothing else, that it gets boring if you don't do that. But I think this is one good example that we should at least be celebrating and be happy about the fact that people are much freer than they were in the past because of how you can have access to any different style that you would like, much easier than in the past. I mean, you were talking about the 80s stuff. I remember not wanting shirts with palm trees, neon colors, and sharks with sunglasses. I didn't want to have any of that. And then you go to the store and you're 8 years old and that's all there is. We no longer live in that world. 8-year-old boys have less stress in their life because of that, and that's kind of nice. So we can have these different ways of self-expression, and then there are two things: don't get stuck in a kind of isolation silo, and reach out and have that interesting communication, and also take care that your good self-expression, you don't want to have a self-expression that is making everyone upset. And be courteous about that.
I knew a man, and you might have to bleep this, but he had a pin on the top of his hat that said, F you. The word was written out, the 4-letter word, F you. This immediately sends a negative reaction to most of the people that you're going to meet. If you're greeting them with such a hostile message. Right? So this is one of the things when you say positive self-expression. We don't want to start creating a society where the moment people see you, you've incited their anger. If we could avoid inciting people, that would be wonderful. It would be really wonderful to just make people feel giddy about greeting you.
Inviting instead of inciting.
Exactly.
You're right.
Absolutely. So I think that's where we should go with all of this self-expression.
That is a fantastic place to go, and thank you for that. That's another great note to end on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.